So, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and also for the invitation to have the opportunity to say something. It's a great pleasure to be working with Lorenzo again, and wonderful to be spending time with Michael again, an artist too, whose work I greatly admire. I want that to be understood. Secondly, I didn't vote for Brexit. These kinds of statements, like walking is the constant and the art medium is the variable, for me personally, these are sort of purposely giant topics, shrunk, reduced down to something very, very small, so as to be able to start to convey thinking about big issues. I have other statements, so just to give another statement by comparison, which is an artwork may be purchased, but a walk cannot be sold. So returning to the title that Lorenzo is referring to, walking is the constant and the art medium is the variable, it means basically that in my own case, from 1973, every single piece of art that I've materialized has had a walk text. So I actually started in 1967, but going from 1967 to 73, I had a period of trial and error. So the issues being how to, what form would the art take that results from the experience of a walk? So from 1973 to the present, as I just said, from 1973 to the present, every artwork that I materialize has a walk text. So this means, the implication is that that I'm a walking artist, and that I specialize in walking. I'm not an artist who makes walks and also abstract sculpture, abstract painting. I specialize only in walking. So therefore, that's the issue with regard to walking is the constant. The issue of the art medium is the variable means that if we take the two words walking artist or walking art, then neither of these two words point to a medium or a material. These two, the medium and the material, is left open. And so in that case, then it also implies that walking art is not personified by one particular medium. And I think this is very important, this kind of open freeness. We may say that walking is a little bit like water, it can go everywhere. So walking has this possibility, because it's not sculpture, is not painting, is not filmmaking. It is the sort of hidden, and is hidden normally, very often, but not always, the hidden element. And so when it comes to the art making, then it means that the medium, the way the art walking experience has been materialized, is variable. It can be anything. It's not forced into one particular medium.
Actually, Hamish came up with this title, and perhaps those who read through the invitation to this talk saw that Katharina Plaus actually asked me to write a short press release, which was a little bit surprising for me, because writing a press release as an artist is always a little bit tricky. But then when the title came from Hamish, it was very clear suddenly that, and all those who read the short text of mine, that the way I understood it was basically that it was definitely strongly influenced by my own experience right now with my work, is that there is basically walking as a kind of form of life, and then there is art which reflects this life. That's how I see it right now. And so what you just said with this problem of how do you, I mean, you're doing a walk, and then how do you talk about this experience? I think this is something that is a problem in my work since I started this, and I have to say it's quite interesting for me, as I started basically 30 years later with my practice, which was a completely different time in the 90s, and I was, of course, I was confronted with this discussion of media, art and media. Which media do you take? Where are you kind of connected to? And the starting point in my case was actually not related to art. I think this is also where we perhaps in a strange way started very similar. I mean, you mentioned once you didn't want to be referred to another artist, to another art period. You wanted to do your own thing. That was very strongly also my inner movement to find something for myself. And actually I started these walking trips actually before I even knew that this could be art.
Thinking about life, I would say, was in 1959. It's kind of a long time ago. In 1959, when I was young, as opposed to old in 1959, I read a book called Wooden Leg, which is the life story of a Northern Cheyenne Indian, and he was born in 1859 by the Cheyenne River in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And so I read this book so many times when I was young, and then of course I read it again this year, and I keep rereading it. It has nothing whatsoever to do with literature, so the sentence construction is, you would say, very boring, and so on. You'd be critical of it in terms of literature, but in terms of what the story, which is a life story, a reservation doctor knew that these people were passing away in time, and in the 1930s quite a few reservation doctors traveled around these various reservations in South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and recorded the life stories of people. And so that basically, I'll speed up, don't worry, there was a collision between a sort of European industrial Christian world spreading from the east coast of the United States and Canada, moving west, and then colliding with people who come from a place. This is where they come from. So the idea of the land bridge across Alaska, that people have come from Asia and have moved down into the United States. The present-day indigenous peoples completely reject that. That's a complete insult. We come from here. We haven't come from somewhere else. And so all this kind of thinking, you know, I can keep rereading this book, and I can find more and more coming out of the book about what is relevant, that Michael's talking about, the way that we live today. And then in 2016, at Standing Rock, which is related to this book by chance, at Standing Rock, then we have the issue of the Enbridge pipeline coming through, and all the indigenous peoples of North America coming together to, they say, we are not protesters, we are protectors. And so then you have the issue of nature, and issue of nature at this time, 2016, is like really at the top of the list. And then when we're in art, then we're talking about landscape. And when we're talking about landscape, then we're going to painting. And when we're talking about representational painting, then we're talking about the quality of the paint, the composition, the ability. And we're not talking about nature at all. We're talking about art. And so the beginning for me was stimulated by this book. And then as a young student in London, then I think rejecting going to the art that I would see in exhibitions was very creative. You know, you can be critical of another artist. It's not a miserable point of view. It's actually a sort of acknowledgement of the other art that's being made. and you look at it, you feel nothing for it, you don't like it, you're against it, and you can write a list of why you don't like it. But this has nothing to do with misery. This is a sort of response to what you're looking at. And so what was going on at that time that I could go and see in an exhibition in London, because I didn't go anywhere else, was that I couldn't relate to it. And so what I was relating to was life. And so this is, my art starts with an influence coming from life as opposed to art history.
I mean, for you it was, and I mean, is this also, was this for you in the beginning also a political kind of, today we call it a political thing, but did you think of it when you walked out your first trips across England, crisscrossing England somehow, that this is, you're now in opposition to the society, or are you a tramp or a homeless person, or? Yeah.
I guess Michael was getting worried that I was going off topic. No. What's he talking about all this anthropology for?
No, that's important.
No, I'm joking. So I think road walking, as opposed to the walking that I really appreciate what you do, Michael. Solo walking with a tent. I mean, this is wonderful, and it may be described as the best. So. So I've done many road walks, as Michael was saying, on the British Isles, because it is an island. There is the main island, and I made lots of walks going down and mostly across coast to coast, because when you start at the water, you can't start walking towards Norway, so you turn inland and then you walk across England or Scotland, going towards the next island, which is Ireland. So these road walks are they may be seen as a comment in relation to car-dependent society. So the perception of driving, that people say, we say, I may say, we. Say many years ago, people would say, how far is it? And someone would say, oh, it's half an hour, and it meant half an hour walk. Of course, we know full well now that it means a half an hour drive. And we don't think it means a half an hour walk. So I think that the walking across the country on roads, which is where cars are, it raises the issue of what is legal. Do you have the right to walk on this road, even though there are cars? I've had situations where, once in Switzerland, I was walking on a road which turned out to be like a highway, and you're not allowed to walk on the highway. But luckily, I was walking towards the traffic. So then a police car came and picked me up, and then they took me backwards. They took me back to where I was like 1 hour before. So then very, very kindly, very generously, they said, over here is a path, and it parallels this highway, and you can go back to where you were going on the path. So this is much better. But so that you become aware of the relationship between a vehicle, the law, and foot travel, which, of course, is what people have done through history, and only in the last seconds of human history, we're doing a lot of sitting.
Yes, I mean, I think that was the reason why I referred to this, strongly referred to this life. What is life today? Yeah, and how can we do out of this life art, actually? And this is where I see this practice in the background. As a way to, I mean, you were mentioning cars now. Here comes the 90s generation, and I just talk of communication. I mean, our life is so. It became, for me, actually, it's sick of endless communication. And I have to say, for me, this kind of walking trips I do, the symbol of it actually really changed since the 90s, because for me right now it's a kind of also running away from this sick situation in our society. Perhaps that's why my work suddenly become much more existential, because I'm much more thinking about myself. What am I doing here, and why am I taking my rucksack and run out for 3 weeks and walk across Albania and not talking to anybody? That's I think that's really a kind of
looks like an escape a little bit.
It's of course. I mean, it is an escape, and it's an important escape actually, and it's a gesture, of course. That's why I was asking this kind of opposition to society. I think since art in the last, especially in the late 90s and 0 years, kind of got rid of being the opposition of society, but part of society, you know, and kind of doing going along with fashion, with architecture, and being part of daily life, of urban life. I think right now is a good moment to go actually the other way again, and propose yourself as a kind of, you're gonna push something back. And I think I realize right now this walking trips, or this walking out and also talking about nature is actually a wonderful way to constitute yourself as a kind of opposition to everything what we are living.
I think one aspect of what we're talking about is the issue of information and how we live by information, and then which then I would reduce it down to saying the contrast between eyewitness accounts and internet research. And so now I know people. I know people that their more or less their entire conversation is as a result of internet research. They don't say when I was in, or when I met this person, or he said, she said, in person, in direct. Everything is a kind of information, and this in relation to your comment, I think this is becomes dangerous for us, in that the way that our brains are working has to do with agreeing and going into huge systems, so that it's like thank you, the systems that we cooperate with are very big. And so then the human then becomes a kind of like a sort of inefficient machine.